In a small, dimly lit room, a thick book lay open on an old wooden table. The pages were yellowed with age, and the air was filled with the scent of old paper and dust. This book, the Bible, has been a source of profound inspiration and deep division for centuries. Its pages have been the battleground of countless debates, the foundation of great empires, and the solace of the broken-hearted. Yet, beneath its familiar leather covers lies a story that is far more complex and nuanced than most realize. For Jews and Christians, who both trace their roots to this ancient text, the Bible is not just a collection of stories, but a living, breathing document that shapes their understanding of God, humanity, and the world. However, what is often overlooked is that the Old Testament, the shared foundation of both faiths, is read and interpreted in profoundly different ways. This video explores these differences, delving into the historical, theological, and cultural factors that have shaped Jewish and Christian interpretations of the Old Testament, and why this matters in the modern world. The Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible as it is known in Judaism, is a collection of ancient texts that tell the story of the relationship between God and the people of Israel. For Jews, this collection is divided into three main parts: the Torah, the first 5 books, the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Ketuvim, the writings. The Torah is the most sacred and central part of the Jewish Bible, and it is studied and read in synagogues every week. The Torah provides the foundational laws and teachings that guide Jewish life, from dietary laws to the observance of the Sabbath. The prophets and the writings, while respected, are not accorded the same level of importance. They are seen as supplementary texts that provide historical context, moral lessons, and poetic reflections on the relationship between God and humanity. In contrast, for Christians, the Old Testament is a single, cohesive work that forms the backdrop to the New Testament. Christians see the entire Old Testament as a prelude to the coming of Jesus Christ, who fulfills the prophecies and promises found in these ancient texts. The Christian interpretation of the Old Testament is deeply influenced by the idea of the fall of humanity and the need for redemption. This concept, which is not a prominent theme in Jewish thought, is central to Christian theology. For Christians, the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is not just a historical account, but a symbolic representation of human sin and the need for a Savior. The prophets are seen as foretelling the coming of Jesus, and their words are often interpreted in light of the New Testament. One of the most significant differences between Jewish and Christian interpretations of the Old Testament is the concept of original sin. In Christian theology, the sin of Adam and Eve is seen as the source of all human suffering and the reason why Jesus had to die on the cross. This idea, which is rooted in the writings of the Apostle Paul, has been a cornerstone of Christian thought for centuries. For Jews, however, the concept of original sin is not a central doctrine. While the story of Adam and Eve is recognized, it is not seen as a defining moment that requires a divine intervention to save humanity. Instead, Judaism emphasizes the ongoing relationship between God and humanity, with a focus on living a righteous life and fulfilling the commandments. The difference in the interpretation of the prophets is another key point of divergence. For Jews, the prophets are seen as historical figures who called the people of Israel back to their covenant with God. Their messages are often understood as warnings against idolatry and social injustice, and as calls for moral and spiritual renewal. In Christian thought, the prophets are primarily seen as predictors of the coming Messiah. Their words are often interpreted as foreshadowing the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. This difference in interpretation can be seen in the way that Christians and Jews read passages from the book of Isaiah. For example, Christians see Isaiah's prophecies as pointing directly to Jesus, while Jews see them as referring to the historical context of the time and the hope for a future restoration of Israel. The way that Jews and Christians read the Old Testament also reflects their different views on the nature of God and the role of the Torah. For Jews, the Torah is the ultimate revelation of God's will, and it is through the study and observance of the Torah that one draws closer to God. The Torah is seen as a living document that is constantly being interpreted and reinterpreted in light of new circumstances. This process, known as the oral Torah, is a central part of Jewish tradition. For Christians, the revelation of God's will is seen as culminating in the person of Jesus Christ. The Old Testament is read in light of the New Testament, and the Torah is often seen as a set of laws that were fulfilled and superseded by the teachings of Jesus. This view has sometimes led to a concept known as supersessionism, the idea that Christianity has replaced or superseded Judaism as the true expression of God's will. These differences in interpretation have had far-reaching consequences for the relationship between Jews and Christians. Historically, the Christian view that the Jews had rejected the true Messiah and the Christian interpretation of the Old Testament as a prelude to the New Testament has often been used to justify anti-Semitic attitudes and actions. The idea that Jews had misread their own scriptures and failed to recognize the fulfillment of prophecy in Jesus has been a source of tension and conflict for centuries. However, in recent years, there has been a growing movement within both Judaism and Christianity to promote interfaith dialogue and understanding. Scholars and religious leaders from both traditions are working to bridge the gap between their interpretations and to find common ground in their shared heritage. One of the key figures in this movement is R. Kendall Solon, a Christian theologian who has written extensively on the relationship between Judaism and Christianity. In his book, The God of Israel and Christian Theology, Solon argues that the fourfold schema of creation, fall, redemption, and consummation, which is central to Christian theology, is fundamentally at odds with the Jewish understanding of the Bible. Solon suggests that for Jews, the main plot of the Bible is the story of God's covenant with Israel and the ongoing relationship between God and the Jewish people. For Christians, the main plot is the story of the world and the need for redemption from sin. Solon's work highlights the importance of recognizing and respecting these different interpretive frameworks and the need for dialogue and mutual understanding. In conclusion, the Old Testament is a shared text that unites Jews and Christians, but it is also a source of profound difference. The way that these two faiths read and interpret the Old Testament reflects their distinct theological, historical, and cultural contexts. While these differences have sometimes led to conflict and misunderstanding, they also offer an opportunity for dialogue and mutual enrichment. By recognizing and respecting the different interpretive traditions, Jews and Christians can build a more inclusive and harmonious relationship, one that honors the complexity and richness of their shared heritage.